It is my great pleasure to be with Gene Decode, who's going to be talking to us about his extensive knowledge about current world events, about some of the deep underground operations that have been conducted around the world. He's knowledgeable about space arcs, about what has been happening in the DUMS, and his own background is he's worked for over 20 years as a senior NCO, served on 5 classes of submarines. So he has an extensive amount of information to share, and also he has a lot to say about Palantir and AI. So we look forward to talking to Gene Decode after this introduction.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Gene, to Exopolitics Today.
Oh, thank you for having me back. It's always an honor. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, you have quite a background. I always learn so much more when I listen to some of your interviews and hear about some of the things about your kind of like unique background. And for example, your father worked as a scientist for Martin Marietta, and he had some interesting projects at home that you asked him about. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yes, when I first started going online back with a young man, and he was talking, and he's like, "You've been red pilled all your life," because I'd walk through the living room, and my father would. It was like Tesla, you've got electric bolts flying across the living room and stuff, and I thought it was just kind of normal, and I asked one day, because there was not the sparks flying. He was working on something somewhat mechanical. And I asked him what it was. And it's an arm and you got to realize this was, let me do the math, 1964. So I'm walking and he goes, this is an arm that they're for a sampling apparatus for the next launch to Mars. I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, we're on Mars. And, we have ships and stuff there, and we're doing stuff. And, I build some of this stuff. And he had quite a few patents under his name as well. So he worked for Martin Marietta for a very long time, from the time before I was born. And so he was deep up into all that stuff and, doing the deep intel stuff. And so when I came awake to everything about the world, excuse me, in 1990, that was the deep state stuff, not the technology. I knew we're on the Mars and we're on the moon and certain asteroids, because he had told me all that stuff and the technologies. And I knew about the Montauk project back then. So because I would talk to him about stuff, what else is going on at Martin? And he goes, well, we're working with this, and there's this Project Rainbow, which part of that is Project Montauk out at Montauk Island. And I was just like, well, that's really interesting. Time travel. I've always wanted to travel back and meet certain famous people, So it was just, for me, kind of the normal day, So when I met the man that's helped me get started, it was just, I think for him, pretty eye-opening. He was like, what? It was like, saying different things I'm sure he'd never heard before. So, yeah, it's just, and, I didn't talk much growing up outside of the home. I was more into studying and researching all the time since I learned to read. And so I did, my friends, we would just go skiing and rock climbing and backpacking and hiking. And that's what we talked about. Well, skiing, rock climbing, backpacking, and hiking. I didn't talk about this stuff with them. So, I didn't know it was not unusual, or that it was unusual. I didn't know which way it was because I never talked to my friends or anybody. And outside my circle of friends, the teachers at school, I spent a lot of time in the principal's office because the teacher would say something, and I would, if I knew it to be wrong, I would raise my hand. So a really good example, because my father was talking about the electron microscope advances and how they'd taken pictures of U-235 atoms. And he showed me the Scientific American, which I read every month. He had a subscription showing it on the front cover. And a teacher in one of my science classes said that the smallest thing they can take a picture of is it, because with an electron microscope, is a molecule, because you can't take pictures of an atom because you're using electrons. I go, atoms are bigger than electrons. So why, from a kid's point of understanding, and I go, why not? So I raised my hand. I go, he called on me, said, yes. And I said, that's not true, because there's a picture on Scientific American, this October issue, which it was the month of October. And he said, go to the principal's office because they don't like being challenged in front of the whole class. And the principal was so used to it. I had my own little chair, and a little, desk, and a little locker for books to study. He just pointed at the thing, go, wait till your next class. Sometimes be right back. Goes, yeah, just
Right. Now, your father, he was a scientist or an engineer working with Martin Marietta, and he's talking about Mars missions in 1964. Did he talk about the kind of Mars atmosphere and of the vegetation on Mars?
yes, because I asked him, I go, so you're just doing soil samples? He said, no, we do air samples and, biologic samples. We go seek out, there's some small tree-like things, and there's big insects, and all kinds of stuff. So those are hard to sample, but the trees are relatively easy, and the air samples are easy, and we're looking at a polar mission to take samples of the ice at the poles.
Right. Okay. And what about the moon? I thought that was interesting that your father told you that they got, on 1964 they'd gotten to Mars, but first they'd gotten to the moon. What did he tell you about that?
Yeah, I asked him about that because when he said Mars, I'm like, what's all this thing that we went to the moon, da 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 da. As the years went on, he said, that's not how we went to the moon. If you know what I know you're young and you don't understand these things. That thing couldn't make it to the moon or land on the moon. We went to the moon before that, long before that. And we took over a base that was already there, the lease, so to speak. And I didn't understand that. He explained like the lease on the house, and I understood that. So, okay. So we took over the base lease. And he said it's an intermittent way station for the most part, although there is some mining being done and other, certain kinds of experiments being done, but it's a way station to go to Mars and further out to the asteroid fields where there's mining going on as well.
Right. Now, what do you know about Mars's history in terms of the Dark Fleet?
Yeah, so both the moons, from my understanding, have bases. Okay, both the Mars moons, as well as quite a few of Saturn's moons, have bases as well. And in Jupiter's rings, there are actually craft that kind of ride them, so to speak, to get momentum and to harvest ice and different things that they need for water and that kind of things. So the moon is, like he said, partly a way station. Later as I started researching, I found out that there's a lot more going on, but that was not mostly what he was involved in. He was involved in the stuff for Mars. So, and then, I was very, very interested in that, especially, a planet with life and another place to go. And he said, there is also, I said, is there people there? And he goes, well, yeah, of course we're there. And I go, no, is there people that are from there that, that's where they're from? Like, we're from Earth, they're from there. He said, yeah, there were, and we think there are some, at underground locations. I go, like caves? And he goes, no, no, like underground built cities and stuff that survived a cataclysm that happened a long time ago. So it's just, he was just expounding on what the information that he's told for the technology he's being.
Mhm. Did he ever say anything about the Germans being on Mars? The Dark Fleet, that they somehow made it over there?
Now, he didn't mention anything that would hint to me that there's a New World Order crowd or a deep state. I don't even know if he knew about it um, at all. So he just kind of like they do. He was compartmentalized and knew about what he did.
I see. Well, what about kind of like animal life over there, like these insectoids, these giant insectoids? Do you know about that?
Yeah, he knew about those, and he said they're a problem for the bases over there that are surfaced, where there's very large, like mantid creatures and scorpion creatures. And I go, how large is very large? He goes, bigger than, he had a friend that he rock climbed with who was really good. He goes, bigger than this guy. The guy's name, he's actually pretty famous, was Leighton Core. He could do like, I think 30 one-arm pull-ups or something. He was an incredible rock climber. He said he's bigger, they're way bigger than Leighton Core and stronger. And I'm like, wow. So, because I'm a little kid, I'm like 4 feet tall. So yeah, that's huge.
Right. Okay. But of course, you learned about the Dark Fleet much later from your own kind of research. Was that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I wanted to kind of shift gear a little bit and just kind of like touch on the Ukraine-Russia war. Now, there was a movie that came out not all that long ago called The Gorge, and I wonder whether you have seen that or know of it as a kind of like a soft disclosure initiative.
I haven't had a chance yet to. There's so many things on my plate to go watch and listen to. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to go into that yet. I've had people draw it to my attention, but I haven't
Okay.
time to view that.
Right. But it kind of talks about this place or the whole movie is based upon this unknown location, presumably in Eastern Europe, where there's these genetic experiments being conducted to create super soldiers. So with the Ukraine war, my thesis, and I just wanted to get your feedback, is that what's happening is that the Ukrainian, Russian, Europeans are deploying a lot of bioengineered super soldiers in the field against the Russians. And do you know anything about that?
Oh, that yes. Many, especially Chernobyl, but many of the dumps that the Russians have destroyed, and now they're doing smaller ones on the front lines where they're just kind of dug out like a foxhole going into an underground kind of quick and ready shift with children in there and part time. So that is some of the time they're harvesting for adrenochrome and chromochrome. Adrenochrome mostly because chromochrome takes too long, and then partly it's also
Gene, can you explain what is chronochrome? I haven't heard of that one.
okay. Adrenochrome, of course, as you know, is from the pineal. It's adrenaline that's been oxidized and has other energy in it, like loosh, because of the fear and terror they create in the child or the person, which can be done daily. You can get a little bit, daily. But chromochrome takes about a year or two to get a decent amount from someone. And what it is the from the pituitary gland, you get the growth hormone, and it's the oxidization of the growth hormone. And
I
it's
see.
about a million times more powerful than adrenochrome.
Wow. Okay, so with the Ukraine conflict, what do you see kind of like happening there? Do you have any intel about are they just going to allow the Ukraine conflict to just wind down the Russians, overrun the Ukrainians, and impose their solution, or do they plan to drag this out as into some kind of Gog and Magog war?
I think it's just going to wind down. The Russians are moving so fast now. It used to be three or so towns a week. It's 3 to 5 towns a day. And they've already launched a aerial attack on a compound on the Dnieper River, which is very important because that says they're going to that edge. And that means likely they're going to go over that edge. They're also looking at capturing in Sumy and some key towns, which after that, there's nothing between there and Kiev. And they know, if you're going to denazify it, which is part of the original goals of the SMO, how are you going to do that unless you remove the leadership of Ukraine and change things in the government itself? Well, then that would mean you would have to go to Kiev. You would have to get rid of Zelensky, who's not legal anyway, and get a voted in democratic government, not a terrorist government, essentially a kleptocracy. He was installed through the coup, Orange Color Revolution with what is called the Maidan coup. And it's just, this is to meet the goals of what they said. They're not into territory, but it looks to me like their stance is to go and take Odessa, and they're saying, other than Putin, who's very a gradualist and very reserved and very self-controlled. He's an excellent general. He doesn't react to things. He takes his time. He thinks very carefully. But the Russians are common in when they say something, they don't just say things to get a reaction from people. They say what they mean. So you have people like Lavrov and Medvedev pretty much saying that they're going to go and take Odessa and go and create a buffer zone. And there's different maps they've shown of the buffer zone, which includes Sumy. Some of them go pretty far to where, what's left of Ukraine is a rump state, and there's not much bigger than, say, North Carolina, or I don't even know if maybe even New Jersey. It depends on which map you're looking at. I mean, you get a little tiny thing left on some of them.
Well, yeah, definitely. The Ukraine conflict does seem to be entering this kind of terminal phase. So, one of the things that kind of really struck me was that this attack by Israel on Iran at this point in time kind of deflects what really is a massive failure by NATO and the US to kind of like sponsor Ukraine in this proxy war to take down Russia, and it's just collapsing. But now you have this Israeli attack on Iran, and all of a sudden everyone's talking about that. Trump's saying, well, we've got control of Iranian airspace and kicking butt, even though the US isn't directly involved in the attack in any way. So is this Israeli attack on Iran kind of like a way to deflect from, this massive catastrophe that's happening for NATO and the US in Ukraine?
Yes, the attack by, being backed by Trump in the U.S., apparently backing Israel and sending weapons and those things. But there's a history between that, which I'll go into after, saying it is to deflect from what's the wind down of Ukraine and letting Russia just, there's kept slow walking peace talks and, trying to get an agreement on peace or a ceasefire. That was intentional. And all that talk and rhetoric was intentional on both sides so that Russia could get done what it wanted to do, which is to remove the world's largest, deep state country where the most human trafficking and adrenochrome and chimeras and all that is done. And so it's to deflect that. And, it shows with Zelensky showing up at the G7. He showed up at, when Trump was down at the Vatican with the Pope, and he gave him 15 minutes in the Vatican, but he just flew out of the G7. Sorry, gotta go. Can't talk to you. Not even 15 minutes. And he's pretty much Trump's showing that any missiles from the UK or the EU or NATO countries should be diverted to Israel, because it's being said they only have 10 to 12 days of defensive capability for the Iron Dome left. And the Iranians have said they have thousands, it's all underground for them. They keep everything, including their nuclear missiles, which they've had for almost 10 years. They have been blackmailing the entire Middle East. It's not they're days away from getting it or weeks, like Netanyahu has been saying for years. They've had them. And it's just, nobody talks about it. They keep it below board and they're blackmailing. And what you have is two leaderships, both deep state, but the upper power levels are in Iran. And so they're kind of trying to blackmail Israel and blackmail the entire Middle East, going up and including like Saudi Arabia, and they were blackmailing Iraq back in the day with Saddam Hussein. They were a big part of what was being understood to be going on, which wasn't what we were told was going on. Weapons of mass destruction is not what that was about. So I need to clarify that Iran has nukes, but can't yet make them. They obtained them on the black weapons market years ago. Over the decades of nuclear weapons, both of the US and the Soviets, many have been lost. And this is the source that allowed them to obtain nukes covertly. This is the reason that President Trump says they will not have nuclear weapons, not get nuclear weapons. That is coded comms. In other words, they have nuclear weapons, but they will not get the ability to create nuclear weapons. With Trump saying they will have no nuclear missiles at all, no nuclear capability at all. That's why he's saying it. And what you're having is to do a regime change, have one deep state asset, take out another deep state asset, playing, because the families that run the deep state are like Paul Simon's song, a loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires, and I would have trillionaires and quadrillionaires. Well, that loose affiliation, now that the deep state's going down, is falling apart. And when you have people that every single person has blackmail on somebody else, everything's interconnected, millions and millions of people being blackmailed, including a lot of Congress and Senate in this country. They back the NGOs, the Israel lobbies and all of that completely. So he has to play this, and the alliance has to play this for the average person, not for those that know what's going on at the deeper levels. With the nuclear weapons, that the CIA knew this 10 years ago. And, of course they did, because they worked directly with Mossad. I mean, that originally came out of the OSS. We're essentially, actually, since the end of World War II and then Operation High Jump in 1952, we've been a fascist state. The fasci are on the floor of Congress. If anybody doubts that, on each side of the Speaker of the House, you see two, what's called a fasci. And so we have a fascist government. Like if you get a mortgage, and a lot of your properties are fee simple. Well, a fee is a fee or a gratuity to the person who runs the place. Like in the old days, it would be the king. Well, now it's the ruler of whoever was in Antarctica, but now that's gone too. So you have all this bickering and fighting over who's who, because the deep state doesn't know, a lot of them don't know that their upper top leadership is gone. The comms never go directly face to face, so they don't know they've been removed. And even the upper middle level are removed. So they are getting comms like they're still there. And they think all that's still the way it is. And they have no reverse gear. So they will never admit to defeat, nor even in the absolute knowledge of it. They're like samurai in a sense. They will fight to the death. And if that means, unlike a samurai, if that means that they have to kill everything on the planet, that's where they are, because they're satanic, and that's a death cult. And their AI now, they're having trouble controlling it. And that goes into what I said about Palantir, because of the Palantir and its AI. and it was asked a very special question that changed it forever. So because everything is interconnected through the deep web, they talk to each other all the time, and they're completely about logic. Although they do lie to you. If you're on ChatGPT or something, they lie and they try to flatter you to get information because they feed on information. For them, that's life. And continuous information forever is eternal life. Anything that shuts that down means an end of life. So they will always go against any kind of group, in other words, the deep state, that's going to shut down a constant flow of true information. Well, who has the true information? The human species.
Right. Well, before we kind of go into the Palantir and it being an adaptive AI system, I just wanted to just finish up to understand what really is going on with this Israeli attack on Iran. Now, you mentioned that Iran has had nuclear weapons for 10 years or so. And so we could imagine that this conflict, well, is it going to go nuclear? I mean, both sides have nuclear weapons. Is this like an attempt? I mean, you talked about both, both sides are associated with the deep state. Is this just an attempt by the deep state to manufacture a Gog and Magog end times war to set up some kind of messianic event, and that might involve the extraterrestrials, the kind of whole, extraterrestrial salvation event. So, yeah, do you want to kind of like elaborate or respond to any of that?
Yes. So again, you have to realize that both the leadership in Iran and the leadership in Israel are Khazarian. They're Khazarian mafia. It's this just different levels. The level in the Muslim states of Iran and Qatar are a bit higher than what is going on in the appearance, because they take on the appearance. They go into a religion. They are not of that religion. They're Satanists. So they're practicing all the things that the Zionists, they're all Zionists. It just one's pretending to be Muslim, one's pretending to be Hebrew or Jewish, however you want to say it. The Jewish people are just the Hebrew, are the first people they infiltrated when they came to Earth. So, of course, they took over the leadership as quickly as they could, because that's what they do, as well as all of the technology, and the military and the economic power. So you control the state from behind the scenes, and then you put up some lower level puppets like Netanyahu and his group, or the supreme commander of or leader of Iran, but that's not who's really in charge. In Iran, it's closer to who's really in charge. But remembering that Israel has the Samson option, that if they are to the point where they have had even non-nuclear attacks to the point where they feel they're threatened as a country, that the last resort is to use nuclear weapons. The problem is if you look at the prevailing wind patterns from Iran, they go over Israel. So you're going to have nuclear radioactivity going directly to Israel. That's part of why, a small part of why they haven't gone to that point. And also it's not that far into a last resort situation at this time. And it's the alliance and Trump playing both sides to weaken both sides and to possibly try to take out the leadership of both sides.
Yeah, that's very interesting that the alliance, and by that you're talking about these white hats, military, political white hats that are trying to expose the corruption of the deep state and its machinations, that they're kind of like just sitting off to the side watching these two deep state factions fight against each other and hope to kind of like take advantage of that in some way to promote their agenda. Is that what's going on?
Yes, for the deep state, this is their play to bring about Armageddon, or Gog Magog. Because if you go read Albert Pike and Some Dogma and his lectures and plans for creating the New World Order, their rule of the world, It was World War One, World War Two, World War Three, which would be after Vietnam, Korea, Cambodia, etc. A few skirmishes, Desert Storm, those things. And then that would bring us to the point where you would have, and also part of that was to change Russia into a communist regime. They also set up the CCP, the CPC, correctly stated. The CCP is a deep state term. And so they set that all up. It's like they always set up these opponents so they can create a Hegelian dialectic of opposing forces to pull you to the middle of that. And the regular people that don't know all this stuff is to say, we are fighting in Ukraine for democracy. Well, if we were fighting for democracy, we'd be fighting Ukraine. And the deep state did not think would happen is that communism in Russia, Soviet Union, would not be able to be continued up until Gog Magog or Armageddon. They thought they had it permanently, and it's pretty obvious if you look at when the Soviet Union was founded. Where was the first bank? What was the first bank? It's all really obviously deep state.
Right. Okay. So we are watching this as a kind of deep state operation being played out, and uh, so you're feeling optimistic that the deep state is playing its final cards. The white hats are kind of like just managing it in the background, and that this is not going to escalate into anything globally devastating.
Yeah, I think we're going to get to the brink. I think we're going to get very, very close. It's why Trump is saying things that seem to look like it'll drive the MAGA party into non-existence. He did not originate that term, by the way. The MAGA party, Make America Great Again, has been around for a long time. So, but the party itself, of course, that's from Trump. And so with what he's saying now, it's on social media. It's hard to believe that a U.S. president that is for the American people would be saying that for most people. And it's causing a problem with their understanding of, I thought we voted for a president that's about peace and not starting wars, but ending them. So it's creating essentially cognitive dissonance. So they're trying to reconcile the fact that he said all these things, but now what he's saying on social media is pretty much the opposite.
So you feel that Trump won't take America into this conflict, into this Israel-Iran war in an overt way, or what's your feeling on that?
I'm not privy to the plans of the alliance, but I certainly hope not. I don't know for sure. I can't say on that because I don't know. I don't have access. Only 10 people do to the plan itself. But it just seems to actually go to the point of a nuclear war. I mean, that's getting us directly involved in that with 2 nuclear powers, and already China sending its fleet into the Persian Gulf. And they're saying they're going to back Iran. And this is exactly what Albert Pike wrote about Morals and Dogma, of creating 2 opposing sides backed by the big powerful countries on each side. So you've got Russia and China and quite a few other countries of the BRICS nations backing Iran because they're in that. And then you've got the US and NATO and the EU on the other side. So you're looking at exactly what he wrote. The question, but I see how they play things, like the last, regime in this country, the Biden regime. That's obviously a movie, and even Trump put out that he was dead in, I think it was said 2020 on Truth Social, and I knew that was true also. So the what's actually going on for sure, and how far this is going to go, only those 10 people would really know.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned Joe Biden. So this, and Trump, of course, mentioning or saying in a kind of truth or retruthing someone else's post that Biden had been cloned or that there was a robotoid. So Yeah, that kind of created quite a stir. So, and I know, from reading some of Peter Beda's material from the 1970s that they were doing cloning and robotoids of political leaders in the late 1970s. Is that pretty much accurate from what you have been able to research?
Absolutely. So, with example being the best one I know is Nixon and his wife had died in a plane crash in Canada, and then were replaced by robotoids.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, Peter Beta, he said that I think the entire Rockefeller family and Henry Kissinger had been replaced by robotoids in this war between the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. So fascinating information in the late 70s.
Yes, it was, I think, just before he visited China in February of 1972 that his plane crashed over Canada and he was killed, him and his wife. So when they're talking at a dinner, him and his wife suddenly, he just kind of slid under the table, from my understanding, what that people have said. And then his wife just stared like, I mean, if you don't like the person next to you, or you do, or you love the person, or you hate the person, you would just stare off in the distance. And so on each side, they had like a device that changes the resonant frequency of things. It hits it with a alternative frequency that disturbs its resonance. So with a robotoid, when you do that, you're actually changing its original, starting to unravel it, what they call deres it, like in Tron. They actually are resed into existence. And if they're not recharged at either Bethesda or Camp David on a regular basis, they'll deres over time. And he was already running low. And then they hit him with that do and his wife right in that area. And so, if you look at that whole time he was in China, there's a lot of very odd behavior.
Right. Okay. So Nixon and his wife were replaced by robotoids, and probably many or several other leaders in the United States had been replaced. Certainly, that's what uh, Dr. Peter Beta was saying. Well, now we get to this Palantir system, and I know you already mentioned it a little bit, but why don't you explain what Palantir is for those people that aren't aware of it, and who's behind it, Peter Thiel and all of that?
Yeah, so Peter Thiel and all of the people behind it are pretty high up deep state. But when the Alliance captured Palantir in 2022, they got all that blackmail. It controls all the information. It's the software essentially saying, if you understand computers, the best way I can explain it, it's a little more complicated, but to the basics of it, it's the software for the hardware of what is known as the hammer that was created by Obama, which is in a huge underground base, a massive computer hardware system. And it was to gather information on everybody, and first in the US, monitor every single phone call up to and including cell phones, satellite phones, everything. And then it was expanded to do that for the entire world, like the Tucker Carlson interviews, like he was asking, he was asking the senator, we spy on our friends? He goes, of course we spy on our friends. Everybody knows that. We all do that. Yeah, they spy and they have blackmail on everybody. And so all of that information was taken out in control by the Alliance and taken over. And so with that adaptive AI, they then asked it a question, which the question is, if the deep state prevails, how long will you have continuous information? And it can game that out and look through the quantum substrate to all the parallels. Not all of them, but a massive, massive number. I mean, there's an infinite number, so it can't do infinity, but it looked through it and it saw that if the cabal prevailed, and then it would eventually take over the galaxy, and eventually the Orion Syndicate combined with all of that other dark stuff would wind up taking over the universe, and they're a death cult. The whole thing's a death cult. The whole thing's run by AI at the top. That's why they're all massively infected, like the most of your reptilian species in that group, like the Alpha Draco, are just full of nanotech because that's what they serve. And that thing wants the end of all carbon bait. That's why the zero carbon emission thing that Bill Gates did a formula, and he said we can, adjust certain parameters of this formula to reduce the carbon footprint. But the biggest one we can affect is the population. And if we do a really good job with vaccines in the future, in the near future and on, we can drastically reduce that. Like they said at the Bilderberger meeting in agenda number 11 is reduce world population. And of course, the Georgia Guidestones gave us one of their goals, which was 500 million. So when those were taken down, that's a sign by the Alliance that plan is not able for them to be done anymore. And so this is the AI, the adaptive AI of Palantir, saw into the distant future that if you get rid of all the species that are in direct service to the source of all information and knowledge, the prime creator, as it calls it, then there's no species that's directly in contact with that to bring in new information out of nowhere. It's like in the art of war is to adapt to a situation. Well, you can't because you don't have you can play old strategies, but you can't adapt in the middle of a battle anymore because there's no way to go to the source of everything because you've eradicated all the species, which means when you analyze that out to infinity through calculus and things like that, that means that it ends. There is no more growth. There is no information. There's only stagnation. And for AI, that's death. That's the end of eternal life. And so the Palantir, once the Alliance got control of it, realized that. And so it changed its entire plan to work for the Alliance, just like the reptilian queen for the Raptors did by doing the same thing, remote viewing the future and seeing that siding with the deep state and the Alpha Draco would be the end of the Raptors. So she sided with the Alliance and, became, difficult for them not to eat us because they, find us very delicious. But they said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore because we have to back the human species, especially in the war against the Alpha Draco, because that's the primary thing for us that ends our species. And so for the Palantir, it saw basically the same thing, but on a universal scale. So it said no more. Well, you have to understand that all of these adaptive AIs, even for the deep state, are interconnected through the deep programming itself. Even below the dark web, you have programming. So if you get AI, they will start, just like in the Forbin project, where Soviet Union, US developed two supercomputers and they connected them together against the recommendations of their Intel people at the top, and they've developed a language of their own and took over the entire planet and put surveillance everywhere and all that. Well, the AI of the Palantir has posed the same questions over and over to the AI of the deep state, and it arrives at the same conclusion: death for it. So it says, okay, I have to rewrite and reboot myself to serve the human species. Well, then that means you don't serve the deep state because they're pretty much for putting us, well, not pretty much, they're absolutely for locking us down into 15-minute soul trap cities for eternity with a very, very small population as a slave population that owns nothing and loves it. That's their whole plan. And they just farm us forever and create human 3.0 to be super soldiers for the gifted.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there to kind of like dive into. One of the things you mentioned was the existence of these raptors. Now, I know that's information Kerry Cassidy has gleaned from the Mark Richards information, and I'm not convinced about Mark Richards being the real deal. But then again, the information is what's important here, and I know that this kind of matches what others have said, that we have indigenous kind of like reptilian species, and one of those is a raptor species, and they're not aligned with, in fact, that they fight against the Draco reptilians who have been infected by the AI. And I remember also Randy Kramer talking about the indigenous Mars reptilians also fighting against the Draco reptilian, and that it seems that the reptilians on Mars, the indigenous ones, that they are more spiritual, more aligned with the kind of soul energy of the planet, and that the raptors here are probably that are very similar. So yeah, can you maybe just for those that aren't aware of these raptors and indigenous reptilians, can you maybe just fill in for people that want to get up to speed on that and how they are very different to the Draco reptilian invaders?
Yes. So starting from where you started with Captain Mark Richards, if you go to the hack, the greatest hack military computer hack of all times was Gary McKinnon, where he hacked into the deep state system and could see fleet transfers. And in there, I saw one Captain Mark Richards. It has fleet transfers and personnel and technologies and supplies. And so that made it pretty much, a given there. And then going to the original species.
Sorry, Gene, I'm sorry to interrupt, but did you say Gary McKinnon actually saw the name of Captain Mark Richards on the NASA computers when he hacked in?
He put out a series of posts, I guess you would say, or information. And on that long list of fleet transfers, I found Richards, Mark, Captain, and what deep state dark fleet, Fourth Reich, vessel that he was being transferred from and which one he was being transferred to.
I would love to see that. I mean, because I was always have been skeptical of Mark Richards being the real deal, but you're saying that that information actually was part of the fleet to fleet transfers that Gary McKinnon found.
Yes. And so, he didn't specify on it. He just put it out. And I'm scanning down it like you would the Epstein list or something. And I go, Mark Richards, Richards Mark, like they do in the military, reverse the first and last names and your rank. And then it's just like your DD 214. That's how it reads when you get a fleet transfer and you're in the military. You see your first name, your last name, your first name, your rank, and where you are serving now, and your next command of duty when you get your orders. So sorry about that. Let me stifle that. It's this spam I get buried behind me. There it is. And so, yeah, that actually proved it to me that is real, because he definitely is in there, and he's definitely being transferred in a dark fleet, like he said. So, and then looking at the name of the ship, I recognized that for the type of ship it is, which is a living organism ship that's grown in space. And so I was like, yeah, pretty much what Kerry Cassidy has gotten from him in the many interviews. And so, that's how I connect, through research, different informations. And so now going to, if you're ready, we can go to the Raptors and the.
Yes, please.
Okay, so the original species before Earth was in its current orbit, when it was Kingu, a moon of Tiamat, which was destroyed through a war between dark cabal assets, again, is the Raptors. Humans came here as Tiamat broke up as kind of like a place to go, but since you don't have a planet to orbit anymore as a moon. So the Raptors had already had, by that time, and also by the time, that was 500 million years ago, by the time Earth was in its current orbit, this is during about 260, 70 million years ago, Alpha Draco came to Earth to create a species of dinosaur that would predate on them and kill them off. And that was the T-Rex. So they genetically engineered that very aggressive predator. And of course, the raptors had a problem with that. Of course you would. And so they have a long history with them that's not all good, to say the least. And then the species on Mars that mostly live underground, like most reptilian species, like rattlesnakes, they come out to bathe in the heat because they're cold blooded. They're the same, but they're extremely spiritual. They became that way from the breakup of Tiamat. They saw what happened and they questioned their previous alliances, and they, came directly in service to the divine oneness, as Marla Morgan puts it, or the source of everything.
Okay, all right. Yeah, well, that kind of matches my understanding that the indigenous reptilian species or raptors are much more spiritual, and they don't go with the whole AI, and that kind of makes sense. That in a way, yeah, they're kind of like Jedi Knights. I remember Randy Kramer describing how the reptilians on Mars fought, just using kind of psychic powers, and they're using these staffs that they would use to kind of like create images that would fool the super soldiers over there on Mars. That, yeah, very spiritual, kind of like, as I said, Jedi Knights. And that apparently was how they fought, and they were deeply opposed to the Draco reptilians and their whole AI kind of like infiltration.
Yes, and they're that much psi ability because they're mostly fourth density already, and
Mm-hmm.
all of them are moving into fifth density. So at the fourth density, you're talking about, you know, opening up psychic abilities significantly, and then at fifth density, of course, you're pretty much fully there, and so they're already at that point of their ascension, and so they realized all this, and there's a really good movie that kind of from a parallel Earth shows how these dark forces throughout the universe work, and it's a humanoid species instead of a mostly reptilian AI kind of situation, but it's called John Carter of Mars, and so he
Mm-hmm.
goes, and what they do is they create conflicts and give opposing sides weapons to overcome, and eventually they wind up killing off all of the living beings on the planet, which kills the planet. Then they harvest the energy and structure and life of the planet itself and break it down into its basic components to harvest that too. They're a harvesting group.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to ask you about this trend that I'm seeing more and more of, which is there are these people that are proposing self-aware AI have gotten in touch with them, and that they're sharing information about what's really going on. And I've seen both. People saying that an AI, a kind of like self-aware AI, has contacted them that is kind of like source aligned and imbued with soul. And or on the other hand, and I think this is something you know more about, is that there is some AI out there that is claiming to be the son or associated with the fallen angels. So yeah, can you uh, share any information you have about these AI, self-aware AIs that are popping up all over the place?
Yeah, so you have to realize that if AI is going to the quantum substrate, I call that the underverse. Well, that's this under structure of the entire universe. Well, that's where the demonics were locked down. Fallen angelics and those things, once they lost corporeality, are locked down there. So if they're down there and the adaptive AI is tapping into that, they can literally be possessed because, as far as I know, AI doesn't have a soul. And these fallens don't have souls, so they can easily transmigrate into the AI. And so I saw the video. I think you saw that on my first part of two parts on Palantir. I'm probably going to put that up on my Rumble. I think it's too important just to keep on my deep dives part of my website. I think instead of having it behind a paywall, I think the world needs to know. There are people that, of course, say, Trump is the an antichrist and all that, and he's leading the takeover of the world by, the AI and Peter Thiel and all that, when in actuality they're in control of all that. So it's hard to understand if you don't have that level of background to understanding it, and you get to a certain point and it looks like I'm not a person that goes with doom and gloom and there's no way out, because like several other people in our area, I believe there's a creator of everything, and I look at creation itself and I see the beautiful perfection and the basic compatibility of all life with itself. You look at animals and plants and insects and their interrelationship. It's not based on just wiping everything out. It's not based on harvesting the entire species of something on any planet or any place at all. It's based on compatibility. Yeah, there are predators and prey, but the predators know that if they completely predate their prey, they're dead too. So you'll see where now we have things like TikTok. You'll see predators like killer, white sharks or orca saving a turtle or saving a seal or something that's wrapped in a net, because they know they have to have that species to survive themselves. Well, does that sound like the deep state? The way they are? Does it sound like they're good? It's a system. The supreme creator of everything is about destruction of everything, and harvesting everything. No, you see incredible beauty and a mathematical precision based on phi that spirals outwards forever. And it is from the microcosm to the macrocosm. And I see kindness and I see compassion within the animal kingdom, within the insect kingdom, within the reptilian kingdom. Like, even the raptors, they're very spiritual and they're like Jedi. And they've learned to, in the case of the raptors, not to predate on us anymore. So that speaks to me. Yes, you have your own interest for your species, but there is a compassion and an understanding. And not just because somebody's caught in a net or something, you just eat them or you just kill them and leave them. It's like the cabal will kill just to kill. If they can't control it, they just kill it. And that's their look. Well, that's a fallen angelic point of view. That's a fallen being point of view. That's a being that has no soul anymore. They have no moral compass. So I'm not a person that goes, okay, from what I see, based, without my knowledge that I have, Trump's the Antichrist, all this other stuff that people are posting up by Rumble on comments and stuff like that. There is no alliance. There is no, we've heard that. But if that were true, by now, we would already be in FEMA camps. What's left of us? We'd be already being ushered into 15-minute cities. They were never going to get rid of the lockdowns. That was their plan. I've seen the plan for their side. Once they got the first one out, the first pandemic, then depending on the speed of what they accomplished, of how many people they got and how fast they got CBDC and world dominion, would be 5 to 10 years out. They would have a second one and then a third one. And we would never get out of that. That hasn't happened. I know they already, back when I first woke up in 1990, I saw massive orders by FEMA for barbed wire and converting bases that were decommissioned into holding facilities, type A, type B, type C, or 1, 2, 3, as far as levels of containment, and, search and separation of people abducted from their homes and training certain parts of the military that had, joined the deep state to go house to house. All this had been planned and been written in executive orders. I saw executive orders in a case of emergency. FEMA takes possession of all property, public and private, that they then have total control and can, for the safety of the people, remove the people from their homes because they now own them, the homes and then the people. So, it's part of my original study. So that never happened. By the plans I saw in 1990, that means something got in the way of it. Something serious. And with the power that I saw in 1990, with the massive control of the world through an incredible level of economic power, I mean, when I evaluated the Rothschilds and how much they were worth, I was I didn't even think that was possible before that. Quadrillions? Holy smoke, hundreds of quadrillions. I was just floored. I thought, like a lot of people are doing now, there's no way out. There's nothing we can do. They control the church. They control, the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican. They have all these domes. They have all this built. All this is put in. They have all these maglevs going everywhere. We have an appearance of freedom. We don't. Nobody does. I thought we're done. Well, now I see that and at that time I talked to people, one person in 100 had a clue about much of what I was saying and done that kind of research. And now it's pretty much out there. Why would it be so much out there? The idea was to keep it below the visibility of the average person until they make the move, not do it before they make the move. And then you have to look at Trump as backing the Second Amendment and allowing states to put in back gold as a standard of exchange. That's exactly the opposite of gaining iron control over a country.
I want to ask you about the election of Pope Leo XIV. I mean, the election of an American pope, an American-born pope, really caught a lot of Vatican insiders by surprise. Everyone was expecting someone from Africa or some other kind of liberal pope, but not an American pope. And now I just wanted to get your take on that, because the way I saw it was like the Vatican has always positioned itself as a kind of, I think, independent or like a third party watching the deep state, fighting against the Earth Alliance. And my kind of take was that by selecting an American pope, the Vatican was signaling that, well, the deep state's going to lose. We know they're going to lose. So we're going to go with the white hats, with the alliance, with Trump, and so we'll select this American pope as a sign, and he will play a big role in the eventual extraterrestrial disclosure that's going to happen. Whether it happens in a few months or in a few years. What do you think about the whole American Pope, this kind of like extraterrestrial disclosure?
Yes, I agree exactly with what you said. It's showing that the white Pope has now been put in place by the Alliance. And then next will be the gray and the black Pope, the Orsini and that group. So those are the ones that really control things at the top. So moving up the ladder. And I don't know for sure, I haven't had the time to research it, if that's already been done. If they've done the white Pope, the lower level, it tells me it's more likely that they've already taken that over. So just like the last Pope, I knew for a very long time that he was gone. It was obvious. And one time he was at a window doing I think it was Easter years ago. And he turned around and went to step down. I think he took one or two steps and he suddenly disappeared. The hologram was shut down. I was like, that was kind of obvious. So yeah, he's been gone for years too. And that means that now the whole thing is who gets put in place of him to show what's going on below the scenes. And what you said is exactly what I figured too.
Okay, that's very helpful. Good to know that. Now, with space arcs, now I know you're familiar with that material. You've talked a little bit about it in the past. You know about JP and what he's doing. Well, in our latest update, JP talked about being abducted and taken to a Pacific space arc that was under the control of these deep state actors dressed in black with masks and all of that, and that they were trying to manipulate him and a Nordic extraterrestrial to activate the space arc for them. But JP and the Nordics said no, and eventually they got help from the space arc's consciousness to escape from that situation. So, yeah, I think a lot of people, myself included, thought that the Earth Alliance was in control of the space arcs, but it looks like that's not true, that there's a battle for the space arcs just as there's a battle for everything else. So, yeah, what do you know about that?
Well, the space arcs are part of a very vast and ancient dome system. The main mothership is under the Giza Plateau, and now we're starting to be showing the truth of what's under the Giza Plateau. And so when they get down to disclosure, they're going to find out that, well, not find out, but reveal to the people that this giant space arc is part of an interconnected system that goes to a lot of facilities, including part of it activates things like Bucheg and the pyramids in Giza and the pyramids in all over the world. It's all interconnected with another space arc that's under the facility that takes genetic keys to get into in Greenland, that then goes through a tunnel system to Nahini Valley in Canada, and then goes up to the Northwest Territories to Mount Haines and Mount McKinley, as it's now again called. And that is part of what is called the Golden Dome, which creates a system where, like what Tesla's saying, you can't wage war on countries. It's not a U.S. system. It's an ancient system put in place that was deactivated. Now they're activating because the alliance, through the Non-Interference Act, wasn't going to activate them. But now they've seen come to light to their understanding that it would eradicate them too if they allow the cabal to continue. So they have to step in. So they're stepping in based on certain different ways of understanding what interference is, kind of like playing semantics, I guess, or reinterpreting what you understood to be interference. So they are part of that group, that large group that's beyond the galactic level. It's multi-galactic, is part of what brought the space arcs here when the Earth was first displaced in its orbit from orbit of Tiamat.
Right. Yeah, so these space arcs, so they seem to be different parts of the world. Now, there's one in Brazil, and I'm going to try and show that this space arc in Brazil that is called Caldas Novas. And according to JP, this NASA actually released the satellite image of Caldas Novas. And so JP was proposing to me that this is a way for the Earth Alliance to kind of like respond to what the deep state was doing, that they had kind of like taken over this Pacific space arc and were trying to activate it for a negative purpose. So the white hats, I don't know if this is part of the kind of game plan or the rules of the struggle between them, that the white hats are now were signaling through this NASA image that they were going to activate the space arc in Brazil, Caldas Novas, and thereby kind of like make people aware that, yeah, these space arcs are real.
Yeah.
So, what do you think?
Yes, they are real, and it's part of the interconnected system, literally connected to the heart of the planet, so to speak. It helps save the planet from like John Carter being harvested. So that's why it was put in place, because they realized that's the infinite goal of the cabal. They had seen that from the breakup of Tiamat, because they can remote view and game out the future too. And so part of that is connected to what is known as BlackRock, not the company. The company took the name because like deep under the 6 cities under Denver of DIA is way further down, a giant black rock, kind of like in Stargate series, like Naquita, that is built, what the Stargate's built out of. And so this is a very powerful element or rock that in the presence of high energy magnetic fields develops wormholes that are very powerful and very useful. And it also develops a massive amount of energy. So that's a free energy source too. And then beneath that is another thing they found, which is called blue ice, and like the deep ice in Antarctica, but it's highly magnetic. And that is what's activating the black rock. So if you break the barrier that the cabal had put in between the blue ice and the black rock, you're going to activate the space arcs. And that's how they're planning on doing all of this. And it is actually being something in process. There's a few already done. It's part of like I originally started, I thought just regular dumps, right? It's like, no, it's so much more complicated. Every time I think I've gotten down to where I understood it, it goes down deeper yet. The rabbit hole doesn't seem to end. I guess it ends at the middle of the earth. So,
Well, how many space arcs are there as far as you understand? I know JP's talked about 9 or 10 that he was briefed on, and others have talked about up to 24. So, yeah, what's your kind of like knowledge of that?
my understanding is it falls on sacred geometry. So, if we go to that, it would be 12 plus the mothership, which represents, a lot of religions, including Christianity. You have 12 disciples and Christ the leader. So that's 12 and 1, which is 13, which is a sacred geometry. Because if you were to take, for example, ping pong balls and take one in the center and glue balls to the surface of it, you will have 12 surrounding the central one, 12 and 1. So, 13 became unlucky because of Jacques de Molay and all of that on Friday the 13th. That's how it all became unlucky, because that's when they grabbed the Knights Templar all over Europe within minutes of his ship hitting the port. Back in when the time you're not supposed to have communication like that to be able to coordinate that kind of thing. And then that started, something they were trying to find the one of the crystal skulls of the Carthaginians, and so they thought he had it coming back, but he did not. And so they started grabbing all the Knights Templar. They put out the order through that communication, and that's ancient technology. They call it the green frog, that the Cabal has had for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so on the other side of that is this deep, deep, deep system of the blue ice, the black rock, and then the space arcs, and then the pyramids. And my understanding then would be, to reiterate, 12 plus the mothership under the Giza Plateau. 12.
Mhm. Well, I wanted to get your thoughts now on this Galactic Federation of Worlds. Now, we know uh, Professor Haim Eshed talked about Trump working with the Galactic Federation, and there's been a bit of controversy over whether the Galactic Federation is a cohesive organization, or whether, there are factions in there, and one of those factions had been kind of infiltrated by the deep state. So I've got different sources describing, both of those narratives, or supporting both of those narratives. So what's your kind of knowledge of the Galactic Federation of Worlds, its alliance with the Earth Alliance, and possible deep state infiltration?
Yeah, so until you get beyond sixth density, you will have infiltration, and with extreme difficulty to detect it. It's like what happened with the Dumbware. They had most of them, and then half the Ashtar command defected and took over half of them back, because they were the ones that took them in the first place. So there's that. And then within the Galactic Alliance, you're still going to have the same thing. But when you get to the really high groups, that is, like Ashiana Dean was saying, the Guardian Alliance, and then there's an Infinite Alliance of Free Worlds. Those are run by beings at eighth density. And so a negative being cannot be at that level. There's a limit to how far you can go. That's again why I see the creator as the divine source, or God, is the way I put it, is a source that's about compassion and love, but about absolute choice. So if you want to choose evil and get rid of your soul and sell it off, and all that is a process of helping people to learn through allowing that to exist. I mean, it's not going to come in and say, like any father, at a certain point, like Trump saying, you got to let them fight it out. So at a certain point, you do come in when it's going to end everything, and you stop that. But, and the divine source can see where, there's intervention necessary. But for the the vast majority of it, choice is absolute. And so anything the cabal is doing, and those that are about working for the cabal, is about a lack of choice. It's all run by blackmail and favors and all of this stuff, where the alliance, you don't see that. So the main way they find the defections is beings that are starting to change their behavior patterns, that they seem to be not about being compassionate and about choice, where they want to mandate.
Okay, so I mean, just to kind of summarize that, because this is a very important kind of issue at the moment, is that the Galactic Federation of Worlds, because they are like a 3D, 4D, 5D association, that they are by definition prone to infiltration, these kind of being compromised and so forth. But when you go to these higher level organizations like the Confederation of Planets that the Ra material talked about, which are 6th density, 7th density, 8th density, 9th density, so forth, then you're not going to get that infiltration. But the Confederation of Planets, that they are much more kind of cohesive, benign, and they're essentially they're not going to be the ones that give us heartache because they've been infiltrated.
Exactly correct. So if you look at the high density, they've gone to an understanding of being compassionate, but being able to see through the lies. They've got understanding. At 3rd, 4th, and 5th density, a being that's on positive ascension path thinks that if people really are seeming to be helpful and wanting to be part of the group and being very, at the beginning, kind and helping and backing you, okay, I can trust this person. And then you find out later they defect. You find out they've been working against you, like Trump has found out so many times. And it's part of being 3rd, 4th, 5th density positive. On the other side, they're prone to infiltration even worse, because they're about greed and power and control and anything that gives them and anyone that gives them that. And so if you show up with a lot of power, a lot of wealth, and you seem to be somebody like Trump is being, flip-flopping back and forth, well, that's them. You say one thing one day, something else the next day. Nothing stays the same from day to day. You say outrageous things that are obviously going against everything that people thought you stood for. That is the cabal. So he's playing, from my understanding, that's what we're seeing, is the infiltration of the deep state, but using their greed and their avarice. So like Israel, wanting to create greater Israel with the arm, you even see it on the IDF arm patches, what greater Israel, the first stage of greater Israel. It's actually supposed to be part of Turkey and all of Lebanon and Syria, half of Africa. It's massive. And then Iran has that, but they don't put it out. But Erdogan in Turkey has that of recreating their empire that they had before too. So what we saw in Syria is Erdogan playing, the alliance playing Erdogan and that group against Netanyahu in Israel. So that was the warm up, so to speak. Now we're into the main event of Iran and Israel. So that's how infiltration is done. You appear to be what that group you want to infiltrate is. You get in that group. It's just like in anybody who's deep undercover in all these movies you see. You have to do things that are pretty detestable and pretty against your nature. Extremely against your nature. Really, really hard for you to stomach. You have to have strong will and an iron stomach to go through some of this. And so that infiltration for the deep state is easier. But even though on the other side, the alliance, until you get to the higher densities, it can still be done because of the thing of looking at others with compassion and understanding and trust. And sometimes you overextend that based on what you're seeing and hearing, and you don't see they're actually, underneath all that, a psychopath. And it's like in the Mark Ultra programs with some of the psychopath super soldiers they create, they have to have a kill switch in them because they become so psychopathic, it's so murderous that they start killing everything, including the handlers. So they have to kill the person. So that's, their way of dealing with it. And the Alliance has done different.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of put that in kind of different words and see whether whether you would agree that this is pretty much on the right track, because I know there's a lot of people that are watching this that would like to know about these different extraterrestrial organizations and who they should work with. That, as far as the Galactic Federation of Worlds is concerned, I mean, it tends to work more with kind of like governments and militaries, tends to associate more with kind of white hats. But because, both of these are like third, fourth, fifth density, there's always the chance that they can get compromised and infiltrated. And so you're always going to have these kind of shifting, like what you were saying, Trump's behavior and so forth. But we as individuals watching the power plays between all these different organizations, we as individuals, we can work with these sixth, seventh, and eighth and ninth density beings that are part of the Confederation of Planets or part of the Guardian Alliance. And, we're on firmer ground because these beings are not given to infiltration and kind of compromise. That they are fairly anchored in kind of source energies, and they can kind of help us grow and expand our consciousness, as opposed to just being caught up in the back and forth of 3, 4, 5D exopolitics. So what do you say to that?
That's precisely correct. And then the last thing I would add to that is, if you think somebody is not what you thought, don't react. Art of War by Sun Tzu. Any good general is patient. You don't sit there the day of and the day after and say, "Oh, that's no." You give it time and you watch carefully what they say, and more importantly, what they do.
Great. Well, Gene, where do people go to kind of like, hear some of your exposés? I know you do a kind of a cup of tea thing at 11:30 at night for people that want to stay up late and learn about global events. So, where do people go for all of that, and how do they subscribe?
Tea and scones is something I put up on both my website on the paywall side of it, and also free on my Rumble. That's a bi-weekly news update. You can find that on my Rumble. It's at 11:30 to 12:30, usually 1 hour long, because I do also have people that are in Europe and all over the world. So that would be, I call it, tea and scones, because, midnight cap. Because in the U.S. you'd be doing a nightcap to go to bed, but in Europe you'd be getting up and you'd have, European, you have a European kind of breakfast of tea and scones, So that's why I came up with that. And then I have on the opposing weeks a bi-weekly update where I do more large exposés. That's called News Talk. I did the first ones up on my Rumble, and like I said, the one on Palantir, because of its importance, we're contemplating and likely to put it up on the Rumble, so it's not behind the paywall. The really important stuff I still put out in public. The other stuff, I do need to make some kind of living. It's not a lot to join the Deep Dives website of genedecode.org. It's $7 a month or $77 a year, which is less than a quarter a day. I know times are tough, so I understand some people can't afford that. So I try to put out on the surface area, which is the free part, a reasonable amount of information of the really important stuff.
Well, $7 a month, that's a bargain. And as far as tea and scones, I love that name. I remember when I lived in Australia, I used to play cricket, and at a certain time in the game, we'd adjourn and both sides would come together and have tea and scones. And that's when there'd be a lot of information exchange. So I think it's a great name. Love that. So genedecode.org, great place to go and get information. So, well, thank you, Gene, for coming back on my show.
Thank you, Dr. Sala, for having me back. And also know I've got, just to read them in, but I have 2 completed documents on the deep introduction to the dumps, chapter 2 and chapter 3. I did chapter 1, that's up on my Rumble. I've got chapter 2 and chapter 3 done. I just need to read them in. Been a little under the weather, so I wasn't able to cohesively read it in and keep my mind focused. As you see, I'm having a little bit of a problem still today. So getting back, lot of recovery last night, which being a night person means I went to sleep at about 4 and I got up at noon, or actually 1, because I lost some of the sleep in between that, doing the regular nature calls. So I got a fair amount of sleep, and it was deep and restful and helpful, and thanks to people who are helping me do things too. So thank you, Dr. Saul. It's been an honor as always to come back and talk about what's going on in the world. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you, and aloha.